Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing a mid-year check-in with all of my reads, talking about some of my highlights, some of my lows, some of my surprises. I'm going to be following the mid-year book tag pretty closely with my questions, so if you're familiar, you'll know what's coming next. Before I jump into answering some of those questions though, I do want to do kind of a general stats check-in. My overall goal for the year is to read 145 books. I read 150 last year, so 145 definitely feels achievable this year. Gave myself a little more wiggle room. And so far I've read 74, so I'm right on track and I think I'll be able to accomplish that goal. As far as how I've read those books, I do read a mix of audio, physical, and e reader, as well as occasionally I'll do a tandem read if I'm able to get the audio out from the library as well. So far, 42% of the books I've read have been solely via audio, 32% have been physical, 13% have been a mix of either physical and audio or physical and Kindle, and 11% have been Kindle. One of my personal goals for myself in my reading is to keep my audio reads at under 50%. This is just a personal goal that I have for myself because I find that I'm a lot more intentional with my reading when I'm reading something physically or on my Kindle versus if I'm listening to an audiobook, I'm likely to be doing something else. And so I know I'm not always as present in my reading. But that's just a goal I like to have for myself, and I'm in a pretty good place with how I'm consuming my books. A little bit surprising for me, but my top genre of the year so far is actually mystery thriller. I'm typically a pretty heavy fantasy or literary reader, and so I was surprised to see this, but reflecting on my year and just how it's been going, I think that I've been gravitating towards mentally easier reads, things that are maybe a little bit lighter, like a cozy mystery, and especially standalone shorter stories. A lot of the fantasy books that I really love tend to be longer or a part of series or, really high scale epic fantasies. And so I think that just with my life this year, I've gravitated towards books that are a little more one and done and easier on the brain for me. Fantasy is my second most read genre, however, so it's not completely out of the picture. And literary is in third place. So all of my standard most read genres are in the top three. They're just in a little bit of a different order than I expected. I do have some reading goals that I set for myself at the beginning of the year. The first one being a 25 and 25 TBR, and so far I've read 12 of the 25, so I'm doing pretty good. However, some of the books left are pretty big in size and in intimidation level, so whether or not I get to all of them by the end of the year, only time will tell. Another goal that I set for myself this year was to cut my physical TBR in half, and I'm proud to announce that it's not going to happen. The next goal I set was to finish 3 series, and I've successfully done that so far with a little asterisk for the third series that I finished. The first series I finished was the Belladonna trilogy. I finally read Wisteria this year after taking a break from the series for about 2 years. I wasn't a huge fan of Foxglove, I kind of fell off on it. However, I really enjoyed the final installment of this trilogy, and I really liked the characters that it followed. The next series that I finished was the Letters of Enchantment duology by Rebecca Ross. I read Divine Rivals last year and I finished Ruthless Vows this year, and I had a really fun time with this series. I think this is a great YA romantasy. It's got some really beautiful prose. I really enjoyed the characters, and I could definitely see myself rereading this book one day, annotating it, and having a fun time. So I really enjoyed this series, and I'm glad I got to finish it this year. The third series that I finished was a reread of The Hunger Games. However, I read the whole series, book one to book three, within about a month span, so I still count it. But that being said, I probably will still finish a third series by the end of the year regardless, so I'm not super worried about that goal. And the last goal I set for myself was to read 10 nonfiction books this year, and I'm exactly at 5, so I'm halfway there, halfway through the year, and I'm pretty confident that I can finish that goal by the end of the year. Some standouts have been Cue the Sun, which is a history of reality TV and how it was created. I'm a really big Survivor fan. I enjoy Big Brother, Love Island, so it was really cool just seeing how this genre emerged in television and in media, and especially how favorite shows like Survivor really influenced other shows. However, my number one standout nonfiction of the year has to be A Little Devil in America by Hanif Abdurraqib. This book is so beautiful, so poignant. It is emotion packed, but I also felt like I learned a lot. I find it really fascinating how he can take just music history and cultural history and really just tie in the human experience to it in a beautiful but knowledge filled way. I think everyone has something to learn from this book, and I highly recommend it to just about anyone. I think that he takes a really interesting look at what performance can mean, and that made for a really, really cool read and something that was unexpected. I definitely went in thinking it was going to be a solely music performance based book talking about genres and artists, and he really takes that outside of the box. So I would encourage anyone who's even a little bit interested to definitely pick up A Little Devil in America. One last thing that I love to track in my own reading is how much money I save using the library. I'm a really big library user. I have been my whole life. And while I don't use the library for every book that I read, I really appreciate being intentional with what I do buy. And I just know that there's books out there that I might not love or that I will love, but I won't read again. And I think that having access to libraries is a really awesome thing. I feel really grateful that reading is a hobby I could hypothetically do for free with the use of my library. And so I try to use it as much as I can. And I've noticed I tend to gravitate towards the library more than I do my physical TBR anyway. So that's even further incentive to not buy books. Typically, what I'll do when I log a book is I have a little column in my reading tracking spreadsheet where I take a look at how much the book cost versus how much I spent on the book. So, this is a really great way for me to see as well what have I bought secondhand? What did I borrow from friends? What did I, somehow mysteriously acquire? As well as what did I get from the library? The grand total of what I've saved so far using the library this year is $1,657.81. I am incredibly wealthy. I don't know what to do with all of my extra cash. Like, what am I going to put it towards now? My bills. Now on to the actual questions of the video. We're going to start off with, what is the best book I've read so far? So this was really tough. I've been thinking long and hard, and I truly cannot pick between these two. So I'm just gonna give them both the number one spot for now. And favorite book will be December Elise's Problem. So going in order of when I read them, my first best read of the year so far is Lie With Me by Philippe Besson. He is a French author, and this was actually translated by Molly Ringwald of Breakfast Club and 16 Candles fame. So that's a pretty cool career pivot, I think. But Lie With Me tells the story of a coming of age queer relationship in France and just the impact that it had on the two boys' lives. The book opens up with our main character slash author, potentially, being interviewed at a hotel and seeing the back of a man's head that he thinks could possibly be this man from long ago, and we watch him get up, tap him on the shoulder, and the chapter ends, and we are taken back to the 1980s when they begin their relationship. This book made me cry and cry and cry. It was so beautifully written. It had so many remarkable quotes on love and on identity and what it means to love another person. And it just broke my heart a million times, but in a really beautiful way. I'm not really a romance reader, but this book I think is a beautiful love story. So I recommend it to anyone who wants a beautiful and heartbreaking time. That is Lie With Me by Philippe Besson. The next book that is a contender for Best Book of the Year is none other than Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. I'm a Sally Rooney girl. I think this is her magnum opus. I think it's her best work yet. And I felt so remarkably attached to this book and to these characters. Intermezzo follows two brothers in the wake of their father's passing as they both navigate tumultuous relationships. Our younger brother, Ivan, is just a sweet, sweet soul who cannot get out of his own head. And he begins a relationship with a much older woman and navigating, how can I love someone and I'm so proud to love them, but I'm worried that the world won't let us love each other. On the flip side, his brother Peter is a very driven, hyperactive type of character, and he's navigating potentially two relationships that fill very different roles in his lives, but both have equal importance. And the brothers are really great foils to each other, which I think makes for a really interesting read. I was a bit daunted starting this book from Peter's perspective. The best way I can describe it is his narrative sounds like stage directions. And I think as the book goes on, you really start to understand why. I see a lot of people have love for Ivan when they talk about this book, and I think that Peter doesn't get enough love. I think he's an incredibly misunderstood character. There's a podcast I listened to one time that talked about how, in moments of grief or trauma, people tend to fall into one of two camps, either overreacting in the sense that they go into hyper mode and they have to control everything in their lives. They have to be the one to arrange all the doctor's visits and call the funeral home and get the food catered and buy the burial plot, and they have to be the one in control of everything, versus the underreactors and the people who go into freeze mode and don't know what to do in the wake of tragedy. And I think that the brothers really reflect these two camps well, and is why it's so fascinating to watch them interact with each other and interact with the world, and why I think they both deserve equal love from readers as well as themselves. So that is Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. Best sequel I read this year, I don't think there was ever going to be another answer, and it is Oathbound by Tracy Dion. I remember starting the Legendborn series about 3 years ago and thinking it was a duology. So I immediately picked up Bloodmarked, and I was like, wow, this is a really crazy book. How's she going to wrap all of this up in, the last 100 pages? And I was reading those pages and I was getting down to, 70 left, 50 left. And I'm like, guys, she's not wrapping any of this up. Why isn't she wrapping any of it up? And that was when I discovered in real time that it was going to be 3 books, and now we've learned it's going to be 4 books. So I have been waiting for Oathbound for like 3 years. I've been waiting so long to read this book. I'm not a big new release person. I don't necessarily feel like I have to read something when it comes out. I read things as they interest me. This being the exception. I was on that library waitlist months before publication. I was number 9 out of like 1,100 people in my library's queue waiting for Oathbound. That's how seriously I take this. You need to get your ass up and join your library holds. It's like no one wants to get their ass up and join their library holds list these days. So, anyway, I read Oathbound as soon as it came out, and I think I fall into the unpopular opinion that this was also 5 stars. I see a lot of people saying that they enjoyed it, but it wasn't as good as the other books. And for me, it had just as much magic. I love Bree so, so much. She's one of my favorite main characters. I think she's so true to herself, and I think she represents a 16-year-old really well. I definitely agree with missing a few characters that we didn't get to see as much in this novel. I won't say who for anyone who hasn't read it. However, someone that we didn't get to see as much in Bloodmarked was back in this novel, and I am a big fan of him. I'm I'm a Nick apologist. You heard it here. Sue me. I love Nick. I'm always gonna love a good old fashioned golden retriever boy. And I really liked that we got to see more of him and understand more of him. I think he's a character that obviously has a lot of privilege, but we got to see how that privilege has impacted his life. Obviously that privilege comes with good things, but in his case it also came with a lot of trauma. And so I think that we got to just see his character in a new light and with a new depth in this book, which was something I appreciated. And I just think he's a sweetie. And I think that it's okay. I don't think everyone has to be dark and brooding. And it's fine if, like, you want your little book boyfriends to be. But I'm 26. I want a golden retriever. I want a boy who's nice. So this was by far my favorite sequel of the year. And I'm just going to sit and twiddle my thumbs until book 4 comes out. So, like I said, I'm not a huge new release reader. I don't typically have to grab things right when they get off the shelves, but there's definitely a few things that have come out this year that I'd love to read soon. The first one I will hopefully get to read soon for a book club, and that is Wild Dark Shore. I have never read anything by this author, but I'm convinced that I'm going to love everything she writes. I own Once There Were Wolves by her, and I haven't read it yet, but I'm excited to read Wild Dark Shore for a book club this upcoming month. I'm looking forward to reading Sunrise on the Reaping. I reread the Hunger Games trilogy in anticipation for reading this, and I think I need a little bit of a break from YA, but I'm hopeful I'll pick it up by the end of the year. And lastly, I read The Will of the Many at the start of this year, so I'm really looking forward to The Strength of the Few coming out and getting my hands on that because whew, I do not know where we're going to go next with that story, and that's so exciting. Okay, my biggest disappointment for the year might turn into a little bit of a soapbox because this book just got under my skin. So, about 4 years ago, I can remember it fondly, I won my first ever Goodreads giveaway. I felt like God's favorite, I felt like a celebrity, I felt chosen, and I won this book. And I started it, and then I put it down, and I didn't pick it up again until this year. But I had this feeling of like, well, the universe wanted me to have this book. Like, the universe was telling me that, like, you won that Goodreads giveaway for a reason. So I just felt like this book would always be around and I would eventually pick it up and I would love it. And it has some elements to it that really made me believe that I would. So I will stop leaving you in anticipation for this book that you likely have not heard of and tell you what my biggest disappointment is. And that is Secret Identity by Alex Segura. So this book follows our main character, Carmen, who is a secretary at a comic book agency in the golden age of comics. She wants nothing more in the world to write her own comic books, but she just can't get her foot in the door, even though her male coworkers with no driver passion can. After another round of being turned down by her boss because he just can't, give a newbie a chance when there's other people who've been grinding at this for years, he turns around and gives a male newbie a chance. This male newbie, who of course hits on our main character a bunch, comes up to her and is like, "Hey, I actually don't have any ideas for a comic book." He just like asked me if I wanted to do this, and I was like, "Yeah, of course, but I don't have any ideas. So like, do you have ideas? And like, you could do this for me, and then I can publish it. But like, it'd be so like, what if you did that?" And she's like, "Okay, what if you put my name on it?" And he's like, maybe, yeah, maybe. And so she's like, "Well, if I'm never gonna get to make my own comic anyway, I might as well just like get to create at the very least." So they make this badass female comic character, the Lethal Lynx, and it takes off. It's successful. Then, annoying male coworker found dead. That's right, dead. And they're like, "Okay, well, we have to keep producing this comic, but then also, how did he die?" And that's kind of where the story kicks off. Let's start with some positives. So, there's only a few. This author is also a comic artist. And so, in this book, if I can hold it up with one hand, you get really cool comic art woven into the story, which I think is really sweet. I think that's a really unique thing to be able to include in your novel. Another cool aspect is I did this one tandem with the audiobook, and it's an immersive audiobook. So anytime you have those comic scenes, they have the sound effects for the automatopoeia, and that was really cool to see. So like, you hear them walking through the rain, you hear the whoosh when she jumps off the building, or the when she like punches someone, and that's really cool. And then that's about where my positive comments stop. And again, this is all my opinion. This is all my personal feelings. If you read this book and you didn't have these feelings or opinions, I'm so happy for you, because that means you had a better time than I did and you weren't disappointed the way I was. So, the best way I can describe this book is that it is clear that it is written by someone who has like witnessed sexism or know that sexism exists, but it's not written by someone who has experienced sexism. I found a lot of the treatment towards female characters that were clearly supposed to see like, "Man, this is unfair. Just because they're boys doesn't mean they're better. Like, she's also good at things and she's a girl." Like, I found that to be a very one dimensional and very like learning about feminism for the first time. And so as a female reader, that was something that just really stuck out to me. Is I was like, well, that's not my experience with sexism. It tends to be a little bit more like under the rug. It's not so like, you can't do this job because you're a woman. Like, people don't say that directly. And then on top of that, I found a lot of the female characters, including our lead, to be incredibly two-dimensional. They were all hot, first and foremost. Every woman in this book is attractive, and our main character is attractive, but she's not like other girls. And that's also really important to remember: is she's a hot woman, but she doesn't know that she's hot, and she's different because she likes comic books. And that, I felt like I was getting hit over the head with that kind of narrative reading this book. And I just think lastly, it was trying to do too much. It was trying to tell this story of, a female writer's rise to success in an industry not made for females. I think that's a strong premise. But then it's also like, well, here's a murder mystery. But then it's also like, but here's he stole her ideas, and now we have to figure out how it's going to keep getting published, but people can't know that she wrote it. And then there's just like other random subplots. And so I felt like we never got to actually focus on any storyline enough for it to be fully fleshed out. So, yeah, I really anticipated this book for so long. And then I just picked it up and it wasn't what I expected. And it was my most disappointing read of the year. So this will be getting placed in a little free library somewhere because it's an ARC. So I can't try and, sell it for $2 at my used bookstore. Okay, biggest surprise. This one's fun. I don't have to be negative anymore. So I mentioned a little bit earlier, but I'm not a huge romance reader. I don't dislike the romance genre. I just don't find myself drawn to it as much. And so I didn't read a single romance book in all of 2024. And then randomly in January of 2025, I was like, what if I read a YA romance right now? And I randomly checked one out on Libby and I read it and I had such a beautiful, wonderful time. I shed a tear. I laughed. I was about to say I chuckled, but that's the same thing as laughing. I had a really, really sweet and fun time with this book. And that was Dungeons and Drama by Christy Boyce. So, Dungeons and Drama, we follow our main character, Riley, who is so excited to do her fall musical with all of her besties, but she gets grounded for stealing her mom's car to go see Waitress. We've all been there. I actually haven't because I haven't seen Waitress live. I've only seen the bootleg, but a girl's got to make do. So she gets grounded, and her punishment is you cannot do the fall musical, and you also have to work at your dad's game store every single day after school. And she's like, oh my gosh, this is terrible and I hate this. And her parents are divorced, so her relationship with her dad is a little bit strained. She's really close with her mom. She doesn't dislike her dad, they're just not as close as they used to be. So her dad's like, yay, we get to bond. And she's like, oh my God, I can't believe I have to do this. She also shows up on the first day of school to choir class. Again, we've all been there. And they're like, oh, actually, we're not doing a fall musical at all because it's not in the budget. Because, of course, it's not, because the arts are the first thing to get cut every time. She and her friends are like, okay, well, we're going to put one on anyway. And she concocts this whole scheme because she's not in the shows. She's like stage manager vibes, which I love because there's not enough stage crew representation in theater related young adult novels. It's always about the ingenue and it's never about the stage manager. So she is like, I'm putting my amazing stage manager skills to the test and I am going to put a whole budget packet together and I'm going to find shows that we can do. I'm going to find places we can source costumes. And that's her like secret side mission of the whole book, is how she's going to convince the school board to let them still do a musical, which I think is amazing. However, to do this, she has to work with her ex-boyfriend. Oh my God. Okay, and now I'm flip-flopping back a little bit, but this is important for the ex-boyfriend thing. This boy on the cover, Nathan, he works at her dad's game store because he and his friends are really into Dungeons and Dragons. There's this girl that Nathan likes who likes him more when he's taken, whatever. So Nathan and Riley, even though they're kind of annoyed with each other and they're like, you're my annoying coworker, why are you here? Why are you in my space? They're like, okay, but what if we fake date so that my ex-boyfriend will get off my back, and then that girl that you like will like you more because she wants you to cheat on me with her, basically. And then we know how every fake dating trope goes. This book was so much fun. It was so sweet. They Riley has some really sweet, just like moments of connections with her parents, which I love a good parental child connection in a book. But also, I was a theater kid, so it felt really nostalgic reading this book. And like, I just remember being 16 and like listening to a musical soundtrack and being like, oh, life is good. Um, and I just really love that like the kids in this book have, stereotypical uncool interests, but there's no point in this book where it feels uncool or where they feel like they're the losers. They're not like the jocks. Like they get to just like love their interests with their full chest in this book, which I think is so much fun. She ends up getting into Dungeons and Dragons. He and his friends end up helping with the musical. And so there's just really great friendships and relationships. And it's not very long. So I think this is such a fun YA book. And it was my biggest surprise. And it broke my romance drought of over a year. So it is Dungeons and Drama. My next biggest surprise, and I'll be a little more short winded on this one, was the Veronica Speedwell series. I love a mystery, but I'm pretty picky when it's a historical mystery, just because sometimes they get a little too like, hey, remember how in the 1800s women didn't have rights? And I just like hate remembering that. Obviously, there's like, more historical context to that, but when I'm reading like a silly mystery book and not a like deep hearted reflection of humankind and history, I think I'm allowed to be a little like, "Ugh, no women's rights? Bummer." Anyway, so I was a little hesitant to pick up Veronica Speedwell, but I saw it really highly recommended. So I was like, whatever, I'll try the audiobook, get it out from the library. If I don't like it, I return it. No biggie. And then I loved it, and I've already read 3 books in the series this year. Veronica is so funny, and the mysteries are, I feel like each mystery so far has been able to stand on its own. I love her and Stoker's dynamic, and just the little sprinklings of like yearning just get me. And I love how few and far between those moments are. So I'm having a lot of fun with the Veronica Speedwell series, and I'm looking forward to continuing it. Next question is favorite new author, and I think I'm going to have to give that up again for Philippe Besson, because this was just so beautifully written, and he has a new book out this year anyway, In the Presence of Men, In the Absence of Men. One of the two. I should find out, because they mean absence and presence are arguably antonyms. Um, but regardless, I want to pick it up because I was so blown away by Lie With Me. Favorite fictional character definitely goes to Vis from The Will of the Many. I really liked this book, turned a lot of stereotypical fantasy tropes on its head. I had a lot of fun reading this book. And just in general, I really liked his character. So, in The Will of the Many, we follow Vis, who is kind of an orphan at the lower rung of this hierarchical society. And a man from higher rung of that society is like, hey, do you want to be my 17-year-old adopted son so that I can send you to this academy and then you can go and like find out some secrets for me? And he's like, sure, why not? Like, I've got nothing else to do. I'm like at the bottom of this, you know, hierarchical system, so might as well. And so he does that. He joins this academy and he discovers some secrets. But like when he discovers these secrets, he discovers even more secrets. Like there's, to quote the ancient texts, there's layers to this ship player tiramisu. I found Fist to be a really great character to follow because I felt like he earned everything that he got. I think sometimes epic sci-fi and fantasy series with these kind of like male self-insert main characters, they are just naturally the smartest and the strongest and the fastest and the best, and they're just naturally amazing in anything, and we don't necessarily see them earn any of these abilities, earn any of this strength, earn any of these top placements. And with this, I felt like he very regularly encountered setbacks and encountered people who were better than him. And he had to figure out, okay, well, how do I still get to where I need to be in my own way? And okay, I'm not the smartest in the room. How can I become the smartest in the room? And so I felt like we had to see him work for the things that he got, which was one of the reasons that he was one of my favorite characters. And I'm just really excited to see what he does next and where he goes next. It's so much fun with The Will of the Many, and I think it is worth all of the hype that it gets. Okay, I added a question because I figured if I'm going to be talking about my favorite fictional character, I also need to be talking about my new fictional op, my new fictional enemy, because boy, do I have one. And, I've read some books this year with characters who are like genuinely evil and, like racist or homophobic or just, you know, like genuinely, like if they were a real person, they would be evil and they would be a bad person. But those aren't fun fictional ops to talk about. So I'm going to pick a fictional enemy that is like a lighthearted fictional enemy. Like if I saw her in the street, I would challenge her to a duel, but like she's not on purpose a Marvel supervillain. And that fictional op is DM from Spark of the Everflame. Don't come for me, romantasy girlies. I know this is a well-loved series, but like let's look each other in the eye. Like let's be real with each other here. That main character is actively fighting that author. That author has she's got some really cool plot points in place. She's got some really cool world building, a really interesting magic system. And DM is actively like, okay, but how can I make all of this worth nothing and make this about me? And how can I be so oblivious about every possible thing? So, Spark of the Everflame is about this girl, DM. She's human and she's a healer, and her mother mysteriously goes missing. And she has to take over her mother's spot with healing some of the descended, who are the like powerful group of people. They're like the Fae, for lack of a better term. But DM does not like the descended because, well, because they're oppressors. Like in a way, I understand where she's coming from. The humans are, the second class. They're, you know, forced to live in, poorer conditions, not as nice cities. But then she's a healer who has to just like look after them, and she witnesses, just the mistreatment of humans on the day to day. And so when she meets these descendants that she's working with as a healer, she's like, these people just don't get it. Um, I don't want to say too much because I don't want to give away the plot, but like so many things happen in this book where as the reader, you're like, yes, this thing is happening. And then you're reading DM actively be like, there's no way in the world that this could be happening. I just was getting so frustrated with her. I'm like, girl, open your eyes, open your brain. You're supposedly a very smart healer. So use that brain inside your head. Oh, and then we just see her like actively dislike this man and then is still like, well, but I can't break up with him because we have a history. And she was just continuously oblivious throughout the entire book. Or she would deliberately contradict herself or deliberately just make really just choices that I couldn't comprehend. Um, and I know that a lot of people love this series and have fun with this series. So if you want to try it out, by all means, but it wasn't for me. Like I said, it had really cool plot points, it had a really cool magic system. I think it's okay if it has if I'm a hater because it has enough love, people that love it. So that is my newest fictional enemy is DM from Spark of the Everflame. Next is books that made me cry, and I have to give the caveat that it does not take much. I cry incredibly easily. I love to cry. I honestly cry with a lot of books that I read. However, certain cries are deeper than others. Lie with Me, wept. Intermezzo, wept. This next book, because I want to make sure that I'm giving varying answers for these questions and not, saying the same book for half the questions. So this third one that really did its big one, really made me just feel like an infant weeping, was Betty by Tiffany McDaniel. Betty is a coming of age story following our titular character, following Betty from when she's born till she's about 18 years old. And we follow her and her family and her siblings as they navigate life. Her father is Cherokee and her mother is white, and a lot of her siblings are white passing, and she is not. So we see her deal with a lot of racism. We see a lot of the characters deal with different forms of abuse. 100% check trigger warnings before going into this book because it has a lot of really, really heavy topics. But despite it all, we get to see a really beautiful story with a lot of Cherokee cultural influence, a really beautiful relationship between herself and her father, and as well as a beautiful relationship that Betty has with her own life and the world around her. And we see her just continuously encounter hardship and still find ways to persevere. This was a book that I never intended to read, just because I heard it was really sad. And I don't read a ton of historical, but I picked it up for a book club that I'm a part of, and I'm so glad that I did. I'm so glad I went outside of my, usual comfort zone with reading to read Betty, and it was, oh my gosh, this book will make you weep, but it's worth it. It's a really, really astounding story. Books that made me happy, and I'll preface that this one also made me cry anyway, was The Spell Shop. The Spell Shop is about this girl and her magical talking spider plant who flee, a city in uproar to her home island to start over and start a new life. While she's there harboring her illegal spell books, she decides, okay, I got to make money somehow. Let me open up a spell shop with a front as a jam shop. And she makes relationships with people in the city and in the town. She just embarks on cute little side quests. And this was just a really, really sweet book about friendship and jam, of course. It was just cozy and sweet, and I love the characters. And I thought that some of the later plot points they introduced to add a little bit more grit to the story were equally merited and, still fun to read about. So I really recommend The Spell Shop. A personal anecdote I have for this book is I also read this one for a book club. And this book club in particular, we do a little craft with each book. And I'm not crafty, and so I rely on my crafty friends to come up with ideas. And they did their big one with this one. One of the book club members who hosted got little potted plants for everyone. And after we talked about the book, we, had our fun little snacks and drinks and decorated potted plants so that we all had our own little cows with us. And I thought it was so fun and it was so sweet. My plant has since passed, but the activity was really fun and we had a lot of fun together. That is The Spell Shop. Most beautiful book I've gotten this year. So, like I said, I'm pretty intentional. I try to be with the books that I buy, but I did go to Ireland with my family, so I knew I wanted to pick up some UK covers of books that I know that I love, that I know I want to read again, where I like the other cover option. The first one that I picked up that I didn't intend to, but I saw this cover and I was like, you're coming home with me, was Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. And this is a fairly simple cover. It's got one image, some, stark text, one solid color. But this is a book where I feel like I can never find a cover that I truly love for some reason, even though it's a classic with a million editions. But I saw this and I was like, I love that visual. I love the color. And I just thought it was so striking. And I love Rebecca. Rebecca is about our unnamed main character who enters a whirlwind summer romance with a much older man. They marry, and she returns to his estate, Manderley, to be the lady of the household and fulfill the role of his widow, Rebecca, in running this household. Rebecca's presence seems to just haunt Manderley. She seems to be everywhere, and the main character cannot escape her. We learn a little bit more about Rebecca as a character. We learn a little bit more about her death. And I think if you're looking to pick up a classic with some really good intrigue and a really awesome gothic setting, I think you should try out Rebecca. And I think if you're going to watch the movie, you need to watch the 1940s Alfred Hitchcock black and white version, and not the Army Hammer version from the 2020s. That's my personal take. Also, just because the Alfred Hitchcock one is so true to the text. My next most beautiful book is one of my favorites from last year, and that is A Study in Drowning by Ava Reed. I really like Ava Reed. I really love her writing, and I really love this story. I know this one gets kind of mixed reviews, but I found it to be really tender. I really loved our main character of Effie. Effie is an architecture student who longs to be a writer, but they don't let women into the writing college. And so she enters a competition to design the architectural plans for the home of her favorite author. And while she's there, all is not as it seems. It's got a great setting. And I just found it to be a really soft and tender-hearted story. I understand some of the gripes people have about her kind of like disregarding architecture as a field. I do think that architecture is arguably like harder than Effie treats it in this book. But I just had a really enjoyable time with this read, and it hit really well. So I was really excited to get such a stunning edition. I've always really loved this version of the cover, so I'm glad to add it to my personal library. Okay, and last category is books that I need to read by the end of the year. Like I said, I have a 25 and 25, so I have about 12 left on that, but I want to highlight like some of the big three that have been on my TBR for a while, or that I feel like the biggest draw to. Like, I gotta get these ones read. It's their time has come. I'm emotionally ready. So the first one is a sequel, and that is The Broken Kingdoms. This is book 2 in the Inheritance trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. I read book 1 a couple of years ago and just haven't picked up book 2 yet, despite book 1 being 5 stars. So this series was pitched to me as a lot of the standard fantasy tropes turned on their heads, and it definitely, at least book 1, was done that way. I'm really curious to see where book 2 goes based on where book 1 ended. But the kind of the basic premise for book 1, The 100,000 Kingdoms, is that our main character gets called to the kingdom by her grandfather, who's like, hey guys, I'm going to pass away, so one of you needs to take my place and fight for your spot. And she's like, I don't really want to do this, but she's kind of forced to like fight her cousins be the potential to be the potential heir to the throne. Meanwhile, the gods that used to rule this world are literally enslaved inside of this castle. So this palace. So these all powerful, like, you know, scary gods are just like roaming around and like at the beck and call of this royal family. And so we see kind of how they got there. We see, some implications that like, oh, maybe that wasn't the best choice. Maybe these gods are going to be like seeking vengeance somehow. And then we're also seeing this fight for the throne. And this book ends in a really interesting spot where like I have no idea what is about to happen here, but I just know that I need to continue on in this series actually, because I'd love to finish this trilogy before I read the 5th season. Next, this one feels really intimidating to me on an emotional level, and that is My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. I feel like I am a loud and proud literary girly, but I haven't read this yet, and so I feel like I can't really claim that title. I have a friend who read this. She's read most of the Neapolitan Quartet and loves it, and I've had this on my shelves. I need to pick it up. Um, I wanted to pick it up this summer, and I arguably still have half of the summer left, but I'm panicking that I'm gonna forget to read it. So I need to read this. This is a book I want to go in as blind as possible about, so I don't know too much about it to give a synopsis, but I do know that it deals with female friendships, and that's enough of a selling point for me. Lastly, we have another fantasy that I would love to start, and that is Jade War by Fonda Lee. Again, this is another book where I'm like, I don't know why I haven't gotten here yet. I don't know why I haven't picked it up. I want to read it so bad. Everyone that has similar tastes to me loves this, so I just keep not starting it. Again, I'm wanting to go into this one fairly blind, so I don't have a ton of information on the synopsis, but it's a pretty popular book, so you've probably heard people talk about it before. So I really want to start Jade City this year. So that is the end of my mid-year check-in. I'd love to know in the comments what your favorite read of the year has been so far, or your favorite surprise, because I think those can be really interesting too. And thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe. I'll see you next time. Bye.